Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kurt Johnson. I'm with the Oklahoma State Department of Education and Special Education Services. I'm a program specialist for the alternate assessment. And also, looks like we have Sheila from DLM with us today. So if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to ask. And then either during the presentation or afterwards, we will address the questions. So today, we are going to be talking about instructionally embedded assessments. And we've been going around the state doing in-person presentations. But the in-person presentations we've been doing has been covering the year-end part, the operational piece. Today is going to focus more on the instructionally embedded assessments that are available through DLM, which are optional, but a lot of teachers don't know about it. So we just want to make sure we're giving an opportunity for teachers to kind of get a general idea of what they are and the usefulness of them. So we're going to start with a kind of brief overview of what the OAAP is. We're going to go over IDEA requirements for students who are taking the OAAP. And then we're going to get into the instructionally embedded assessments portion. And then at the end, we'll have time for some questions. So in case you're not familiar with the OAAP, the Oklahoma Alternate Assessment Program is a component of the Oklahoma School Testing Program, and it's designed for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And the grade levels and the subject areas of the OAAP, it mirrors the OSTP. In order for a student to take the OAAP, the student has to meet participation requirements, and some of those requirements as a criteria checklist sheet for these students. And then within that, these students need to have some type of adaptive behavior and cognitive deficits based off current evaluation data. So that's just one component that would be in their IEP. But again, there are certain participation requirements for these students. These students generally represent 1% of the total tested population of students. So that's not the special ed population, that's the total tested population of your district per se. So it would be grades 3 through 8, grade 11. So these students generally represent 1% of that population. So in addition to students needing to meet the criteria to participate in the OAAP, IDEA has some additional requirements. So as I mentioned earlier, the criteria checklist for assessing students with disabilities on alternate assessments will need to be completed. IDEA, a few other things they require is that the student has short-term objectives or goals within their IEP. And another item is that the student's academic goals or curriculum is tied to alternate academic achievement standards. So these are sometimes referred to as essential elements. So these students, their curriculum, as you know, isn't going to be tied to general education standards. The curriculum is based off of alternate academic achievement standards. That's really kind of the focus of this presentation, is how to tie these students, their curriculum, to these essential elements, monitor their progress, make sure that their curriculum is grade appropriate and aligned to some of the content that they'll be assessed on at the end of the year. And so within using instructionally embedded assessments, kind of arises from the questions, well, how do we align OAAP students' curriculum to essential elements? So maybe, you know, you're in a smaller district, you don't have a lot of resources or even support from staff, or you might be the only one who kind of has an idea or experience working with these students. So there's, you're kind of up against, you know, behind the 8 ball a little bit with the amount of resources that you do have. And then another question often asked are, what are the benefits of using the instruction and assessment planner in Kite Educator portal? And so these two things we're going to explain, and again, it's going to go back to that what I mentioned in the previous slide about the student's curriculum. The students who participate in the OAAP, their curriculum needs to be tied to essential elements. So what are instructionally embedded assessments? They're computer-based assessments intended to integrate classroom instruction. And in order for the system to be operational, the window would be open. The window is open right now for instructionally embedded assessments. We do have, I looked yesterday in the state, we have, I think, around 75 students who are already using the instructionally embedded assessments. Their teachers set it up for them, which, again, this is totally optional. But we're gonna show you why this is useful and it just kind of makes sense overall. And it's implemented through the instruction and assessment planner found in Kite Educator portal. So going back to that, you might be from a smaller district and you have limited resources. Well, this is something that you already have access to, is the Kite Educator portal, and it's in place already for you to be able to do this. And if you're not familiar with DLM, and maybe this is your first time to ever give the DLM assessment, I would encourage you to contact me. Our information is on the website, and we have some other helpful information, some presentations that we can go over that will kind of give you an idea of what dynamic learning maps is and some more comprehensive information about what the OAAP is in itself. So going back to why use instructionally embedded assessments. So we mentioned earlier the IDEA requirement, but beyond that, more importantly, there's a lot of benefits for the teachers and benefits for the student. So for the teachers, it's going to provide instructional guidance. It's going to give a teacher experience administering a test. It provides a teacher immediate feedback with the progress report that generates in there. And again, it's going to integrate instruction with assessment seamlessly. And for the student, it could get them in the routine of taking a test. The test is individualized and customized to their needs, and it just provides the student more opportunities to demonstrate what they know. And instructionally embedded assessments are taken anytime when the student is prepared based on the teacher's provided instruction. So it's up to the teacher to decide when to give the test based off the instruction, when you feel that the student's ready to be assessed. And it's an individual assessment. It's not for a group. It's tailored to that student's individual level. And it's not going to be something where the whole class takes the same test at the same time. So it's individual to that student. So using instructionally embedded assessments, it's going to identify the student's knowledge, skills, and understanding relative to grade level targets. If you have those same grade level targets as academic goals in the student's IEP, you can use these instructionally embedded assessments, monitor that progress, and it generates a progress report every time you you provide instruction and you assess the student. So the progress report is going to update and will include that essential element on that progress report that you've instructed on and assessed. So then you can evaluate if additional instruction is needed. You can determine if the student is ready to move on to another linkage level or even a different essential element. The benefits for teachers, big benefit is the feedback. And this is what the individual student progress report would look like. So you have it based off different claims, conceptual areas. So the teacher's chosen essential element to instruct and assess. And after that assessment is completed, the progress report will show how that student did within that. And it will show the date that it was instructed, the date that it was mastered, if it was mastered, when it was attempted. So there's a lot of different options within that for these students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And some more benefits for the teachers. It promotes the use of mini maps. And it allows the teacher to choose the essential elements and linkage levels. A teacher has time to develop and implement instruction for the chosen essential elements. When it comes time to test, how long the teacher wants to instruct, it's totally the discretion of the teacher of when to do that. And it helps the teacher understand how the skills and understandings across essential elements often overlap. And some other benefits, again, the teachers gain experience administering the testlets for these optional instructionally embedded assessments. It will better prepare the teacher and the student for when the operational assessment in the spring comes. And, you know, it's really important for this population of these students to kind of get in some type of routine, a pattern of predictability. And if you're using the instructionally embedded tests throughout the year, you know, these students are going to have more opportunities to demonstrate what they know. And when it comes time for the operational piece, these students are going to be more familiar and comfortable with taking that operational test. So some key differences between the optional instructionally embedded assessments and the required spring assessment. So for the instructionally embedded assessments, the teacher chooses the essential element in the linkage level. There's no set number of testlets that must be completed. Each time a student completes a testlet, a student progress report is generated. And a big thing that we're often asked is about the student's score affecting their year-end score, and instructionally embedded assessments does not have any impact on the year-end score report. For the operational piece, the required spring assessments, the system will choose the essential elements in the linkage levels for the student. There's a set number of testlets that must be completed, which varies by subject and grade. There's not a progress report provided after the student takes the test. And the student performance on the spring assessment is used for accountability purposes. There are some cautions. If you do decide to use the instructionally embedded assessments, it's totally optional, again, for teachers. You know, if your district has multiple sites and maybe you're interested in using it, you know, you just want to make sure you check with your principal or special education director, see if, you know, they would support you or approve of this. And it doesn't have to be a district-wide implementation. It can just be one teacher or one building. So there's a lot of flexibility within that. But a few cautions: it should be used after instruction has occurred. It's not appropriate to use a testlet for baseline or prior instruction. So if you have a new student and you're trying to get an idea of where they are, this is not some type of baseline assessment. It's not repeated progress monitoring events. They're not benchmarks or interim tests either. And they're not going to predict how a student will perform on the spring operational test. And these are not the practice testlets that generate before the teacher starts with the operational testlets. So if you've done DLM before in the past, when you start in the window or right before the window opens, you'll see the practice testlets. These are not practice testlets either. Okay, so before you begin using the IE part of it, you're going to set up your account in Educator portal. So this is the same as the year-end portion. So there's nothing that for setting up your account, there's nothing in addition to what's already required in this for the spring testing. So you log into Kite Educator portal. You'd electronically sign the test security agreement. Your rosters would need to be set up. So you would verify your roster and student information. And then you would need to complete the P&P and first contact survey for each student and complete your test administration training through Moodle. So these are the same things that you would do for the spring assessment. The teacher must complete the test administration training. So if you're a returning teacher, you have one module. If you're a new teacher, you would have 4 modules to complete. And again, You'll sign the security agreement, the Kite student portal for the computer that the students will test on. The Kite student portal needs to be updated. So that program will need to be updated for this year. If you try logging in, to the old software version, you'll get a message. And you'll need to install the new Kite student portal. Students must be enrolled and rostered to each student and have the first contact survey and PMP completed like I just mentioned. Using instructionally embedded assessments. So the window is open. It closes February 26th. The teacher uses the instruction and assessment planner, which is located in Educator portal for this. The teacher is going to choose the essential elements for instruction and assessment, choose the linkage level. Next, you'd plan and implement the instruction, and the teacher would adjust plans and provide additional instruction as needed. Teacher would then administer the testlet after instruction on the chosen essential element. The test itself was done through the Kite student portal, which again would need to be recently updated. And then the teacher is going to use the instruction and assessment planner to make decisions about further instruction. So the first step for using instructionally embedded assessments is to choose. A great resource for choosing your essential elements that you want to use for instructionally embedded assessments are the DLM blueprints. And it's going to, it's based off the DLM blueprints anyways. The instructionally embedded assessments are based off the DLM blueprints. If you're not familiar with the DLM blueprints, I would encourage you to look at those as you're doing your requirements before you get to actually designing the curriculum for your student. You need to make sure you are familiar with these blueprints. So the blueprints are a list of essential elements in each claim and conceptual area. It includes a criteria for essential element selection to meet assessment requirements. And so there's two places that you can access the blueprints. So hopefully everyone can see the screen. Okay, I'm going to switch to the internet here. So if you go to, this is a State Department homepage. If you go to Services, Special Education, this is our Special Education homepage. And I'm going to show you how to access the OAAP web page. So on the Special Education website, there's a blue menu on the right side. If you go to Assessment, this is the OAAP webpage. Hopefully you're already familiar. If you have any questions, you can always contact us. Here's our contact information. If you scroll down, you'll find the blueprints. So here's the English Language Arts, Math, Science, 11th grade US History. You can also access the blueprints on the Dynamic Learning Maps website. And here's a link to the Dynamic Learning Maps website. So this is the Oklahoma page. And then if you go to Manuals and Blueprints, you'll also find the Math Blueprint, the ELA, and Science. Okay, so those are two different places that you can access the blueprints. Oops. Oh, there we go. Oh, now we got to find the, well, this is a bit of a problem. Let's see. Oops, I got the wrong slide.
It's all right.
Oh, we're gonna take a TV timeout here.
Yeah, that one. And hit that little thing there.
Okay.
Is that about where you were?
Yep. Okay, sorry about that. The blueprints for ELA and math, they've been updated. Overall, there's fewer essential elements. Grade 6 and grade 9 writing have one new essential element. The instructionally embedded assessments, again, the testlets will only assess one essential element. The exception is all writing essential elements will be assessed in one testlet. So writing's a little bit different, but all the testlets will assess one essential element. If you're familiar with the blueprints from last year, they've changed a little bit, so it might throw you off. But they're all there, either on the State Department website or on the DLM website. So here's the major claims and conceptual areas for English language arts. Major claim is going to look like your annual goal in the student's IEP, their academic goal. The conceptual area is going to be similar to the objective or the benchmark.
It's like a way.
So if you already have annual goals within your student who's going to take the OAAP, you know, maybe they are close to the major claim, or you're getting ready to revise or develop a new IEP for the student, I would recommend that you look at, if you're using, if you're using academic goals for these students, these academic goals already need to be tied to essential elements. So here are the essential elements, right? So the student shouldn't be having academic goals that are Oklahoma academic standards, a gen ed standard that are, 3 or 4 grade levels below. They should have grade level academic goals based off of essential elements. So this is where your annual goal would come from right here, your major claim. And then your benchmark, your short-term goal, is going to be similar to the conceptual area. So here's an example of math. So if you're already using, say you're using these as your benchmarks or short-term goals for your students, and you need some type of way to measure their progress on these goals and their annual goal, right? So the instructionally embedded assessments are great for this. Oftentimes it's hard to really get an understanding of how these students are progressing towards their goals. Sometimes, when I taught, I had students, myself, contained classroom, providing direct instruction, and sometimes you're providing so many supports for these students, it's really kind of difficult to get some type of, objective data or score report for these students to really see how they're progressing. So using instructionally embedded assessments, it just ties everything, seamlessly, really. And then you also have a progress report that you can use as well. You don't have to generate a different progress report. So here's the DLM ELA Blueprint example. This is for grade 4. And this is what it will look like. And here's math, what it will look like. And again, I showed you where to access these. If you have, a lot of times in your self-contained classroom, you might have students who are in different grades, but you're teaching the same concept. So again, when you're looking at the blueprint and you're deciding which essential elements to choose, a lot of these conceptual areas, they're going to overlap. So you can be, providing instruction on the same conceptual area and then differentiating your instruction for grade 4 essential element and grade 3 essential element, as the students are working. So you just want to make sure you're familiar with the blueprints before you start using the instructionally embedded assessment. And once it's set up and you've chosen your essential elements, then you'll be ready to go. within our blueprints for Oklahoma, it has the year-end test blueprint. And this is what most teachers utilize in Oklahoma, since the instructionally embedded assessments are optional. A lot of teachers will just look at, these are the essential elements that are going to be on the year-end test. And so these are going to be covered, which is another great place to start when you're trying to choose essential elements for the students. After you've chosen your essential elements, you're going to choose a linkage level for that student. This kind of goes back to our previous assessment system for the OAAP, where you had to choose the level of complexity that you thought the student could really demonstrate their knowledge at, and then submit that evidence. So this is kind of the same idea, right? So you're gonna choose the essential element, and then look at the linkage level and choose the correct linkage level for that essential element for that student. And if you start off and you think the student might be at a target and then does really well on the assessment, you can always go back and you can increase the complexity, test the student at a different linkage level, or choose a different essential element as well. So this is the ELA example. This is the math example. So again, you're looking at the essential elements you're going to use, and then you're going to choose the linkage level. Okay, so the next step is to plan. So you're going to access the instruction and assessment planner in Kite Educator portal. So the instructionally embedded assessment window must be open, which it is. You're going to need to complete your security agreement, your test administrator training. The students will need to be enrolled, which all students are already, they should already be enrolled. We did a statewide upload for the enrollment at the beginning of the year. So students should be there. If they're not rostered yet, you can start doing that, or you can make the request to your special education director or your district test coordinator, whoever has that level of access in Kite Educator portal, to start rostering your students to you. And then you'll need to complete the first contact survey for these students as well. You're going to log into Kite Educator portal. You're going to go over to Manage Tests, and then under Manage Tests, you'll see Instruction and Assessment Planner. And this has been redesigned this year by Dynamic Learning Maps. Sheila told me that they invited a lot of teachers in and kind of got some constructive feedback, some candid conversations about what the teachers would like. And they went back and they designed it based off the teachers' needs. So this is really designed for the teachers, and it's very, it's easy to use, and it's just a great resource overall. So and again, we're just trying to make sure a lot of teachers don't know about this or aren't aware about this. So this is just a way of getting that message out. Okay, so once you're in the assessment and instruction planner, you're going to select a student and go to view or create plan. So you'll have an ELA option and a math option. So with this example, the ELA option has been chosen. So here's the planner. You can see on the left-hand side, you have a list of different essential elements. So going back to the blueprint, you've already looked at the essential elements. You've identified which ones you use. You've looked at the essential elements that are going to be used at the year-end test. You've looked over the student's IEP, and you've decided which essential elements to choose. So you've chosen the essential elements, and then you'll see over here you have the different linkage levels as well. So you're going to go in and choose a linkage level for that student. Also for ELA, there might be some sensitive themes that would impact the student or affect the student. So there's a filter option to remove those sensitive themes within the ELA, Instruction and Assessment Planner. So again, you've chosen your essential elements, and then you're going to choose the linkage level. And it doesn't have to be the same linkage level for your essential elements. One essential element could be at the distal precursor, another essential element maybe at the proximal. So it's totally up to the teacher, and again, it's going to be individualized to that specific student. While viewing the instructional information provided, there's just a few questions to ask yourself. What are the skills and knowledge that will be assessed at the chosen linkage level? Is the linkage level appropriate for the student? What type of activities and instruction might be useful prior to assessing the student? So again, kind of have an idea about how you're going to instruct the essential element in the linkage level. So you've selected the essential element. You're going to go to the linkage level. So here's my essential element. Here's my linkage level. And then I'm going to select Begin Instruction. Within that, we'll show a mini map. And that mini map, I think it's on the, I think I have another slide about the mini map, but it will show how the breadth and complexity increases from that initial level all the way to the successor level, which is another great resource to access as you're planning your instruction for the student. So here's an example of an essential element with the different linkage level, including the mini map. And this is for English language arts. And this is what the mini map would look like for that essential element. Okay, so after you've chosen your essential elements and the linkage level for those essential elements, and again, you can choose as many or as little essential elements that you want to for your student. It's totally up to the teacher and based off the individual needs of your student. So the next step would be to instruct. So you provide your instruction. And then the last step is to assess the student. So you're going to log back into Kite Educator portal. You're going to access the Instruction and Assessment Planner. And then you're going to find that essential element. You're going to go over to the linkage level. And then you would select with a little menu option up there. You click on that and you would select Instruction Complete, Assign Testlet. It will ask you, are you sure? And if you are sure, you click Continue. The next step would be to retrieve the Testlet information page from Educator portal. And so the Testlet information page is going to have the Testlet type, the number of items on the test, the materials needed, materials use, suggested substitutions, just like it does on the year-end test, the required test. So if you've done this before, for the year-end test, this should already be familiar to you. But again, the key difference is going to be just that one essential element at that one linkage level is the assessment, is what it's composed of, okay? But you're gonna access that Testlet information page. Next step would be to log on to the computer that the student is going to be taking the test on. If it's, a computer-based or if the teacher's doing the test for the student, you're still going to need to log on to that computer. Install or reinstall this Kite student portal. You want to make sure you have the most recent update on that. You're going to log in using the student's credentials. The credentials can be found in the instruction and assessment planner. It's going to have the student's username and password. You're going to select the test. And if you've selected that you're ready to assess, multiple tests, just select that desired testlet at that time that you're going to use. And then after you've assessed the student, you repeat the process. So you choose essential elements. Maybe you've already chosen them all out. You go back to planning and instruct and then assess. So the process just repeats itself. So instructionally embedded assessments, what they do, they provide the student with teacher and the teacher with experience in the system. They allow for an assessment experience following instruction on an essential element. Having a student complete instructionally embedded testlets will not impact testlets delivered in the spring assessment window. They will not impact the student's score report on that operational spring assessment either. The instruction and assessment planner is a tool that can be used to plan instruction for a student's academic goals. Next, we have some DLM testlet examples. If you've done the DLM testing before, you should already be familiar with this. There's two different testlet types. There's the computer delivered and the teacher administered. So the computer delivered testlets maximize student interaction. The items are written to the student. There's an engagement activity followed by 3 to 9 items. It's generally more for your independent students. The students are going to independently select the response. There are supports for the teacher entering the student's responses and navigating screen to screen if needed. So here's an example of a testlet at the proximal precursor for 4th grade English language arts. So identify explicit details in an informational text. That's the essential element. And I'm just gonna click through this and then you can read it. So topic is Native American tools. Native Americans made the tools they needed to survive. There's the item question. It goes on to the next item.
You're muted.
Sorry, I did that.
Okay. All right, hopefully everybody can hear me now. So I was saying at the end of the testlet, the student will get this message, are you finished? Red box means that you're not done. The blue dots mean you are finished. You can choose to end or go back. The other option is a teacher-administered testlets. And the teacher will have directions found in student portal. It will include a scripted statement, interactions, items for the test administrator to complete based on observation of behavior. So the items are for the test administrator to complete. So you're gonna set up the task for the student and record the response based off the teacher's observations. And these are testlets, some testlets at the initial and distal precursor linkage levels. And all writing testlets are administered by the teacher as well. So the teacher administered writing testlets, there's going to be an engagement activity. Requires a student to select a topic for the English portion. The test administrator will follow the educator directions, interact with the student, follow the script, and then you're going to observe and record observations of the student's writing. And then the writing product will not be, submitted. And this is the same process for the year-end writing testlet as well. So here's an example of math 7th grade essential element. And this is at the initial precursor. So this is a computer or the teacher administered testlet at the initial precursor. So the essential element is solve multiplication problems with products to 100. Here's the educator's directions. Here's an example of the script for the teacher. And then the teacher would record the student's response. And then the teacher goes on to the next item and repeats the same process. And then again, some of the manipulatives, for the year-end test, you can go to the Dynamic Learning Maps website and find the materials or suggested materials for those different essential elements that are going to be covered for math. You can use similar substitutes. There's suggested substitutes as well. And if you do have something that the student's already familiar with working when it comes to use the use of a manipulative, and you can still measure what's being asked, not providing any additional support or cues for the student with your substituted materials, you can use something that is more familiar for that student. So there is some flexibility there. And then you just repeat going on to the next item and record the student's response. Then at the end, you get the same message. Are you finished? If you don't have an answer completed, it will show you. You can go back. Also, with the instructionally embedded assessments, at these two levels, the initial precursor and the second linkage level, that when you're doing a computer, maybe Sheila can provide some information here, but there's an option in the instructionally embedded assessment for no response for the students. And I don't know if that's in the computer administered testlet or just the teacher administered testlet. But for these students, going back to, monitoring their progress, demonstrating their progress on their IEP, there is an option within these assessments for a no response option as well.
Hi, Kurt, it's Sheila. You are correct. Most of the testlets that have the no response options are in the initial precursor level testlets, which would be the teacher administered testlets, because that's typically where the students working at that linkage level at the initial precursor level, the least complex level, would need the option of no response.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This year, also something that's changed. In previous years, if you're finished with an item, the dot would be green, or it would be a green check mark. This year, it's a blue dot. So, but it's the same options. You can go back to the item that's been missed, try it again whenever that student's ready with this. Okay. Some other resources that are on the Dynamic Learning Maps website. We mentioned the blueprints earlier, but there's also an educator resource page for ELA and for math. For ELA, it's going to have the essential elements, familiar texts, some writing resources. The familiar texts include a guide to the foundational area of the learning map, foundational maps for all grades, a guide to practice activities, and release testlet examples. So this is going to be on the ELA portion. This is a familiar text. If you haven't accessed this resource, I would encourage you to do this. This is really useful prior to the year-end test. And then math as well. It's going to have your essential elements on there. We'll have a collections list, so you can see what materials you might need for different items that could be on the test. Suggested substitutes. You're going to have some release testlet examples that you could become familiar with. So these are great resources to use anyways. They're especially useful to use prior to the year-end assessment. And then there's also on Dynamic Learning Maps, they have a professional development site. And if you click on the professional development link, it takes you to this page. And you click on professional development. And then if you're struggling to, if you think there's a better way to teach a concept on a certain essential element, or maybe, you don't have much experience teaching a certain concept, there's a great resource here for each essential element for math and English language arts, as well as science. So you can click on that essential element, that major claim. It's the major claim. So you have a major claim, and then within that claim, certain essential elements. So you can click on that major claim, and then you can find certain conceptual areas of that major claim to become more familiar with. So this is a great professional development resource. And then you can also monitor your professional development, if there's some type of requirement for your district to have a certain number of professional development hours and you're kind of on your own for that. So this would be a good resource to use as well. Okay. If you have any questions at this time, I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. Feel free to ask questions. There's a survey. If you would like to take the survey, you're welcome to. It's a QR code to access the survey. You can use your picture app on your phone, and it should take you to that survey within whatever browser you're using on your phone. Okay. Anybody have any questions about the use of instructionally embedded assessments?
And you guys can use the chat box. We're monitoring the chat box, or you can open your microphone.
You're also welcome just to ask any, general OAAP question. If you have a question about the spring window or anything like that, you're welcome to ask that at this time as well.
I may have missed this, but is the PowerPoint available for us to review to go back to?
I can, for everyone that's signed in, I'll send a link to this PowerPoint later today. So I'll send it to your email. And it will be a link. It'll take you to a website, and then you can download it from that webpage. Okay. Amy says, I would also like the recording for my other teachers who cannot be here today. And also, everyone who's signed in, I'll email a link to this recording today. So if you've signed in, we'll have your email address. So whatever email address you use to sign in under, check that email, check for an email later today or tomorrow, and we'll have a link for this presentation. Okay, we have another question. Will closed captioning be provided with testing or with an interpreter? So, is this a question about the year-end assessment? within the assessment itself, there's certain supports that are available. So if it's a computer based where the student's more independent and can navigate the computer, they're at maybe a higher linkage level. There's certain supports. Also, based off the personal needs profile of that student. So I mentioned the surveys that you'd complete when you're setting up your rosters. If you go click on your student, there's 2 surveys that you would complete. So within that, if the student needs that type of support, you can provide some type of an interpreter as well, if that's appropriate for the student. So if it's if the teacher's using so the teacher has the interpreter, and the interpreter is kind of providing the instruction. Is that okay? So yeah, it would be. It's kind of up to your school district how you want to go about that. You want to make sure that the district test coordinator would be aware of this situation. And then if the district test coordinator thinks it'd be useful for that interpreter to observe maybe a test administration prior to or completing the required test administration training as well, she's probably wouldn't be considered as a test administrator since she's just providing the interpretation. But it would be useful for that interpreter to be familiar with that process before she begins. But that would be how you want to go about that, would be a decision for your school district. Okay, yes, you're welcome. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you for attending. And again, we'll send out an email later today or tomorrow, and it will have a link to the presentation on it. Okay, thank you.